The early morning sun cast long shadows across the private terminal of Atlanta International Airport as Sarah Mitchell strode through the polished glass doors. At 35, she carried herself with the quiet confidence that came from building a tech company from the ground up. Her navy blue blazer and matching trousers spoke of success, while her natural hair was styled in a neat professional twist. Today was supposed to be routine, a quick flight to Silicon Valley for an important merger meeting. Sarah had made this trip dozens of times before, but something felt different the moment she stepped into the terminal. The usual buzz of activity filled the air. Pilots checking their flight plans, crew members wheeling luggage across the marble floors, and other executives hurrying to their chartered flights. Thomas Barnes stood at his security post, his gray uniform pressed and badge gleaming. He had worked at the private terminal for 8 years, and in his mind, he knew exactly what a private jet passenger looked like. When he saw Sarah approaching with her designer carry-on bag, his eyes narrowed, and his hand instinctively moved to rest on his security desk. "Excuse me, ma'am," Barnes called out, his voice carrying across the quiet terminal. "This is a private aviation area. The main terminal is through those doors and to the left." He pointed toward the exit, not bothering to hide the dismissive tone in his voice. Sarah paused, taken aback by the unexpected confrontation. She had her ID, booking confirmation, and company credentials ready, the same documents she'd shown countless times before. "I'm aware this is the private terminal," she replied calmly, extending her documentation. "I have a 9:30 flight chartered through Elite Aviation." Barnes barely glanced at the papers. "I'm going to need to see additional verification. These could be copied." He crossed his arms, planting himself firmly between Sarah and the security checkpoint that led to the waiting areas. The terminal had grown quieter. Other travelers slowed their pace, watching the scene unfold. Among them was Michael Chen, one of Sarah's business partners, who had just arrived and immediately recognized what was happening. He pulled out his phone and began recording, his expression grim. "I provided standard documentation," Sarah stated, her voice level despite the growing knot in her stomach. "I'm the CEO of Tech Fusion Solutions, and I have a meeting in California in 4 hours. What additional verification are you requiring?" Barnes snorted. "CEO? Listen, ma'am, I've been doing this job for years. I know every company that comes through here, and I've never heard of Tech Fusion. Maybe you're confused about your booking." Sarah felt her heart racing, but years of navigating corporate boardrooms had taught her to channel frustration into focused action. She pulled up her company's website on her phone, showing recent news coverage of their latest software launch. Her photo was prominently featured in Forbes' 40 Under 40 article from last month. "Sir," she said, her tone professional but firm, "I understand you're doing your job, but your assumptions are incorrect and causing a delay. I'd like to speak with your supervisor." Barnes's face reddened. "Supervisors don't come in until 9. Until then, I make the calls about who goes through. And right now, something's not adding up about your story." More phones had come out, recording the interaction. The discriminatory undertones were impossible to miss. Sarah noticed her pilot, Captain Reynolds, approaching from the tarmac. He had flown her multiple times and was wearing a confused expression as he took in the scene. "Is there a problem here?" Reynolds asked, his presence adding another layer of legitimacy to Sarah's position. "Ms. Mitchell, we're doing our final checks now. We should be ready to board in 15 minutes. Barnes faltered for the first time, looking between the pilot and Sarah, but instead of backing down, he doubled down. "Captain, this woman claims to be some CEO. I'm going to need corporate headquarters to verify her identity before I can let her through." Sarah had already pulled out her phone, dialing both airport management and her company's legal team. As she waited for them to pick up, she maintained her composure, knowing that every eye in the terminal was on her. The morning sun continued to stream through the windows, illuminating the scene that would soon become a viral symbol of ongoing discrimination in professional spaces. Michael Chen stepped forward, still recording. "I'm on our board of directors," he announced. "We can have 20 people verify her identity within minutes. Would you like me to start making those calls?" The situation had reached a tipping point, and in the next few moments, it would either be resolved professionally or escalate into something much bigger. Sarah took a deep breath, knowing that how she handled the next few minutes would. The tension in the private terminal had reached a fever pitch. The morning sun now streamed fully through the large windows, casting harsh shadows across Thomas Barnes's increasingly flustered face. More passengers and airport staff had gathered, creating a loose circle around the unfolding scene. Sarah Mitchell stood perfectly still, her phone now on speaker as she waited for airport management to pick up. The whole music echoed faintly in the tense silence. Michael Chen, still recording with his phone, had been joined by 3 other business executives who recognized Sarah from various tech conferences and board meetings. Barnes shifted uncomfortably, but his stubbornness seemed to grow with each passing moment. "Recording isn't allowed in the security area," he announced, pointing at the phones. "Everyone needs to put their devices away, or I'll have to call airport police." "Actually," came a clear voice from the crowd, "recording is permitted in public areas of private terminals. I'm Patricia Wong, Elite Aviation's legal counsel." A sharp-dressed woman in her 50s stepped forward, her heels clicking against the marble floor. "I was here for another client, but this situation requires immediate attention." Barnes's face reddened further. "This isn't your concern. I'm following security protocols." "Which protocols exactly?" Patricia interrupted, pulling out a tablet. "Because I have Elite Aviation's complete security guidelines right here, and nothing suggests requiring corporate headquarters verification for a properly documented passenger." Sarah's phone finally connected. "This is Airport Operations Manager David Martinez." A voice crackled through the speaker. "Mr. Martinez," Sarah began, her voice steady. "I'm Sarah Mitchell, CEO of Tech Fusion Solutions. I'm currently being denied access to my chartered flight by one of your security officers, despite having all required documentation. Your officer, Mr. Barnes, is insisting on additional verification that isn't standard protocol." The crowd had grown larger. Among them, a young intern from another company was live-streaming the entire incident to social media. The viewer count ticked up rapidly as people tuned in to watch the discrimination unfold in real time. "I understand the situation, Ms. Mitchell," Martinez replied. "I'm viewing the security cameras now. Please stay where you are. I'm 3 minutes away." Barnes began to look nervous, but instead of backing down, he dug himself deeper. "Listen here, all of you," he said, raising his voice. "I've seen all kinds of scams in my time. People with fake IDs, forged documents. How do I know this isn't some kind of setup?" Captain Reynolds, who had been making calls of his own, stepped forward again. "Mr. Barnes, I've personally flown Ms. Mitchell 6 times in the past year. Elite Aviation has her photo ID on file. She's passed through this very terminal dozens of times." "Well, I've never seen her," Barnes retorted. "And until I'm satisfied." "That's exactly the problem, isn't it?" Sarah finally spoke up, her voice carrying clearly across the terminal. "You've never seen someone who looks like me in this position, so you've decided I don't belong. Instead of checking your assumptions, you're choosing to create obstacles that don't exist for other passengers." The live stream's comments were exploding. Viewers were sharing the feed rapidly, and hashtag #PrivatTerminal Prejudice was already trending locally. Several people in the crowd nodded in recognition of their own similar experiences. The sound of rapid footsteps announced the arrival of David Martinez, the operations manager. He was accompanied by 2 other security officers. Martinez took one look at the scene and knew exactly what he was dealing with. "Mr. Barnes," Martinez said firmly, "step away from your post." "But sir, I was just..." "Step away." Martinez's tone left no room for argument. "Ms. Mitchell, please accept our sincerest apologies. Officers Thompson and Rivera will escort you to your aircraft immediately." As Sarah was finally cleared to proceed, the crowd began to disperse, but the damage was done. The videos were already spreading across multiple social media platforms. Patricia Wong was rapidly taking notes on her tablet, and Michael Chen had stopped recording but was already on the phone with Tech Fusion's PR team. Barnes stood to the side, his face a mix of anger and dawning realization as Martinez spoke to him in low, severe tones. The morning sun had risen fully now, illuminating the terminal in bright, unforgiving light. What had started as a routine morning had transformed into a moment that would spark national conversation about prejudice in professional spaces. Sarah walked toward her gate, her heels clicking against the floor, her dignity intact but her heart heavy with the familiar weight of having to prove herself yet again. In the luxurious waiting area of Elite Aviation, Sarah Mitchell sat with perfect posture in a leather chair, surrounded by her legal team who had arrived within 30 minutes of the incident. The large windows offered a clear view of her waiting private jet, its engines humming in preparation for takeoff. The morning's events had caused a 45-minute delay, but Sarah's mind was focused on something bigger than her delayed schedule. The videos are everywhere, Michael Chen reported, scrolling through his phone. Over 2 million views already, and it's been less than an hour. He showed Sarah the trending hashtags. Hashtag Sarah Mitchell CO and hashtag Privat Terminal Prejudice were leading the conversations. Patricia Wong, Elite Aviation's legal counsel, was typing furiously on her laptop. Ms. Mitchell, we're preparing an official statement. Would you like to review it? She turned the screen toward Sarah, but before she could read it, David Martinez, the operations manager, approached with two other airport executives. Ms. Mitchell, Martinez began, his face showing genuine concern, we've launched a formal investigation. Mr. Barnes has been placed on immediate administrative leave. We want to assure you that this behavior doesn't reflect our values or standards. Sarah nodded, maintaining her characteristic composure. Thank you, Mr. Martinez. But I think we all know this isn't an isolated incident. She gestured to her phone, where dozens of messages from other executives of color had already poured in, sharing similar experiences. The terminal had returned to its normal bustling state, but people kept stealing glances at Sarah and her growing team of supporters. Captain Reynolds approached again, looking apologetic. Ms. Mitchell, we're ready for takeoff whenever you are. We can make up some time in the air. Just a moment, Captain, Sarah replied, then turned to address the gathered group. I appreciate everyone's quick response, but I want to handle this thoughtfully, not just reactively. Jennifer Torres, Tech Fusion's head of public relations, who had rushed to the terminal, spoke up. Social media is demanding a response. News outlets are already calling for interviews. How would you like to proceed? Sarah stood up, smoothing her blazer. Her next words would set the tone for how this incident would be remembered, and more importantly, what changes it might inspire. Here's what we're going to do, she began, her voice calm but authoritative. First, she turned to Martinez. I want a complete audit of your security protocols, not just an investigation of this incident. How many similar complaints have been filed? What's your current training program? I want data, not just apologies. Martinez nodded, already pulling out his tablet to take notes. Sarah continued, addressing Patricia Wong next. Elite Aviation has been my partner for years. Instead of just condemning this incident, let's use it as a catalyst for industry-wide change. Can we draft guidelines for standardized security procedures that eliminate opportunities for bias? Patricia's eyes lit up with understanding. We can create a task force, bring in other aviation companies. Make this a collective effort for change. Sarah then turned to Jennifer. For our public response, we'll focus on solutions, not just outrage. Yes, what happened was unacceptable, but let's channel this attention into meaningful action. Schedule a press conference for when I return from Silicon Valley. We'll announce a new initiative for corporate transportation equity. The group watched in admiration as Sarah transformed the humiliating incident into a platform for change. Even the other passengers in the terminal had stopped pretending not to listen, many nodding in approval. One more thing, Sarah added, checking her watch. Mr. Barnes, I want to meet with him once the investigation is complete. Not for an apology, but for a conversation. Real change starts with understanding. As she finally gathered her belongings to board her flight, Sarah's phone buzzed with a message. It was from her mentor, a veteran CEO who had broken many barriers herself, handling it like a true leader. They never see our strength coming. Sarah walked toward her plane, her team falling in step behind her. The morning sun had fully risen now, promising a new day and perhaps the beginning of necessary changes in an industry that had operated on unchallenged assumptions for too long. As she climbed the stairs to her jet, Sarah paused briefly, looking back at the terminal. Sometimes, she thought, the most powerful response to prejudice wasn't anger or retaliation, but the calm, determined pursuit of lasting change. High above the clouds, Sarah Mitchell's private jet cruised smoothly toward Silicon Valley. She sat in the plush leather seat, reviewing merger documents on her laptop, but her phone wouldn't stop buzzing. The incident at the airport had exploded across social media platforms in ways no one could have predicted. Michael Chen, sitting across from her, looked up from his tablet with wide eyes. Sarah, the original video just hit 10 million views. Major news networks are picking it up. He turned his screen towards her, showing clips from the security footage that the airport had released, capturing the entire confrontation from multiple angles. The footage was telling a powerful story. In one frame, Sarah stood composed, documents in hand, while Barnes gestured aggressively. Another angle showed the growing crowd of supporters, and a third captured the moment when Captain Reynolds vouched for her identity. The contrast between Sarah's professional demeanor and Barnes's obvious prejudice was striking. "Your name is trending worldwide," Jennifer Torres, the PR head, announced from her seat. "Celebrity influencers are sharing the videos. Look at these comments." She began reading from her phone. "This is what we deal with every day." She handled it with such grace. "This woman is showing us how to face discrimination with dignity." Sarah's personal email inbox was flooded with messages from other executives of color, sharing their own stories. A prominent fashion designer wrote about being blocked from entering her own fashion show. A real estate mogul described being mistaken for the cleaning staff in his own building. Each story reinforced what Sarah had always known: her experience wasn't unique. The flight attendant approached with fresh coffee. "Miss Mitchell," she said softly, "I hope you don't mind, but I shared your story with my daughter. She's studying business in college, and she needed to see this. To see someone like you standing your ground with such professionalism." Sarah smiled warmly, touched by the personal impact her experience was already having. Just then, her phone lit up with a notification. A major business magazine wanted to feature her on their next cover, "Leading with Dignity," the CEO who turned discrimination into dialogue. "Look at this," Michael said, pulling up a new video. It was a compilation of security footage from other private terminals across the country, showing similar incidents. "People are coming forward everywhere. Your story broke the dam." The hashtag check your assumptions was trending, with people sharing their own experiences of being judged based on appearance in professional settings. Corporate leaders were posting about their company's bias training programs, or lack thereof. The conversation was expanding beyond aviation security to touch on systemic issues in corporate America. Jennifer's phone rang. "That was Good Morning America," she reported after a brief conversation. "They want you on tomorrow's show. CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News have all reached out too. This isn't just going viral, it's becoming a movement." Sarah took a sip of her coffee, thinking carefully about her next steps. The viral spread of her story meant she had a platform now, a chance to push for real change. But she also knew the fickleness of viral fame, how quickly it could fade without substance behind it. "Send me the latest social media statistics," she told Jennifer. "I want to understand exactly who this story is reaching and how they're responding. And get me data on diversity in private aviation, from pilots to ground staff to executives. If we're going to have this conversation, let's have it with facts." As the jet began its descent into Silicon Valley, Sarah opened her laptop to a fresh document. She began typing, "From incident to impact, a proposal for industry-wide change." The viral moment had given her a voice. Now she would use it to speak for all those who had faced similar barriers. Her phone buzzed one final time before landing. It was a message from her mother, with a link to the viral video. "Baby, you stood there just like I taught you, head high, spirit stronger. But you did something I couldn't in my day. You made them listen. You made them see." Sarah looked out the window at the California landscape below. The viral spread of her story wasn't just about one incident with one security guard. It was about everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong, everyone who had ever had to prove their right to be somewhere. And now, millions were watching, waiting to see what would happen next. The elite aviation boardroom buzzed with tension on Monday morning, just 3 days after the incident. Executives sat around a massive mahogany table, their faces illuminated by the screens displaying the viral videos and social media statistics. CEO Richard Henderson, a man known for his careful decision-making, had called an emergency meeting that couldn't wait. 40 million views across platforms, the social media director reported, clicking through slides. The hashtag Elite Aviation Accountability has been trending for 72 hours straight. Our customer service lines are flooded with people demanding action. Henderson leaned forward, his expression grave. Show me the numbers from our client survey. The next slide revealed a disturbing pattern. 15% of their minority clients had experienced a similar treatment but hadn't reported it, fearing it would complicate their future travel arrangements. Patricia Wong, their legal counsel, cleared her throat. We've completed our initial investigation of Mr. Barnes's employment history. There were 3 previous complaints filed against him in the past year alone. All were similar in nature. They were handled quietly, with simple warnings. The room grew silent. The previous complaints had been buried in paperwork, treated as isolated incidents rather than a pattern. Now, with Sarah Mitchell's case going viral, they couldn't ignore the systemic nature of the problem anymore. Mr. Barnes has released a statement through his union representative. Jennifer from HR announced, reading from her tablet. He claims he was just following security protocols and meant no offense. He's requesting a formal hearing before any permanent action is taken. Henderson stood up, walking to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the private airfield below. Aircraft worth millions of dollars gleamed in the morning sun, each representing clients who trusted elite aviation with their travel needs. That trust was now at stake. Show me the draft of our public statement, he requested. The proposed response appeared on the main screen, full of corporate jargon and careful legal language. Henderson shook his head. No, this won't do. We need to take a stronger stand. He turned to face his team. Draft a new statement. First, we're terminating Mr. Barnes's employment, effective immediately. His actions violated not just our policies but our core values. Second, we're launching a comprehensive audit of our security procedures at all terminals. Third, we're creating a new position, Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer, with real power to make changes. The PR team scrambled to take notes as Henderson continued. And here's the most important part. We're establishing a client advisory board, led by Sarah Mitchell if she's willing, to help us identify and address discriminatory practices in private aviation. This isn't just about damage control, it's about leading industry change. As if on cue, Sarah's latest social media post appeared on their monitoring screen. She had just finished her Silicon Valley meetings and posted a thoughtful message about turning moments of discrimination into opportunities for education and growth. The post had already gained thousands of shares. Ms. Mitchell's approach to this situation has been remarkably gracious, Patricia observed. She could have immediately sued us, generated even worse publicity, but instead, she's focused on creating lasting change. Henderson nodded. That's exactly why we need to match our professionalism with real action. Our response needs to show we're not just reacting to bad publicity, we're genuinely committed to change. The meeting continued as teams were assigned to different aspects of the company's response. HR began drafting new training protocols. Legal started reviewing security procedures. Marketing prepared a comprehensive communication strategy. By afternoon, Elite Aviation's official statement was ready. It acknowledged the incident without excuses, outlined specific actions being taken, and committed to measurable changes in policy and practice. The company also announced a $1 million investment in diversity initiatives across the private aviation industry. As Henderson reviewed the final draft, his phone buzzed with a message from a board member. Bold move, Rick. This could change the industry standard. He typed back, It's time. We can lead this change or be forced into it later. I prefer to lead. The statement was scheduled for release at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, time to hit the evening news cycle. Elite Aviation was about to take a stand that would reshape private aviation's approach to diversity and inclusion. The question wasn't whether other companies would follow, but how quickly they would need to adapt to the new standard being set. 2 weeks after the incident, Sarah Mitchell sat in her office at Tech Fusion Solutions, watching multiple screens displaying news coverage of the ongoing changes in the private aviation industry. What had started as a single discriminatory encounter had sparked a transformation that nobody had expected. On one screen, a major airline CEO announced new security protocols designed to eliminate bias. Another showed a roundtable discussion where industry leaders, many of them people of color, shared their experiences openly for the first time. The third screen displayed live statistics of a newly launched app that allowed travelers to report and track discriminatory incidents across all forms of transportation. "The numbers are remarkable," Michael Chen said, walking in with a thick report. "Since your incident, over 300 executives have come forward with similar stories. Every major private aviation company has revised their policies in the past 2 weeks." Sarah picked up the report, scanning through the pages. Private terminals across the country were reporting a surge in diverse clientele, as if her story had somehow granted permission for people to claim spaces they'd previously felt excluded from. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a particular graph. "Flight bookings by minority executives have increased by 40%. People aren't hiding in commercial first class anymore, trying to avoid potential confrontations in private terminals." Her assistant buzzed in. "Ms. Mitchell, President Henderson from Elite Aviation is on line 1. He says it's about the industry summit next week." Sarah took the call on speakerphone, allowing Michael to listen in. Henderson's voice filled the room. "Sarah, we've got confirmation from every major player in private aviation. They're all coming to the summit. Even the smaller charter companies want to be involved." The summit had been Sarah's idea, a gathering of industry leaders, security experts, and executives from diverse backgrounds to create standardized, bias-free security protocols. What started as a suggestion had turned into the most anticipated aviation conference of the year. "The tech companies are on board too," Sarah replied. "We'll have AI experts presenting on bias detection in security systems and software developers ready to create standardized screening apps." Just then, Michael's phone buzzed with a news alert. He quickly pulled up a video showing a security guard at another private terminal, this time properly checking credentials without any bias. The caption read, "New training protocols in action." "It's not just aviation anymore," Michael noted. "I've gotten calls from luxury hotels, exclusive clubs, high-end retailers. They'd all want to review their security procedures. Your story made them realize how much business they've been losing through discriminatory practices." Sarah walked to her office window, looking out at the city skyline. In just 2 weeks, the conversation had evolved from a single viral video to a national movement for professional equality, but she knew the real work was just beginning. "We need to focus on sustainability," she said, turning back to Michael. "The media attention will fade, but the changes need to stick. That's why the summit is so important." Her phone lit up with a text from Thomas Barnes's daughter, an unexpected alliance that had formed after Barnes reached out to apologize. The message read, "Dad's speaking to security teams now, sharing his story. People are actually listening." Barnes had surprised everyone by becoming an advocate for change, openly discussing how unconscious bias had influenced his actions that day. His honesty about his mistakes was helping other security personnel confront their own biases. "The industry report cards are ready to launch," Michael added, pulling up a website on his tablet. They had created a rating system for private terminals, scoring them on everything from security protocols to staff diversity. The transparency was unprecedented in the industry. Sarah smiled, remembering something her grandmother used to say, "Sometimes the door has to hit you on the way in before it can stay open for others." The humiliating encounter had been her door hit, but now it was propped wide open for others to walk through. A notification popped up on her calendar, another interview request, this time from a global business magazine doing a cover story on transformative moments in corporate America. The tagline read, "When one incident changes an industry." Sarah looked at her busy schedule for the coming weeks, meetings with aviation executives, speaking engagements at security conferences, diversity consortium planning sessions. What had started as discrimination had transformed into an opportunity for lasting change, proving that sometimes the most powerful response to prejudice was systematic, sustainable transformation. 1 month after the incident, Sarah Mitchell stood before a packed auditorium at the National Aviation Security Conference. The room was filled with faces representing every level of the aviation industry, from security guards to airline CEOs. Most surprisingly, sitting in the front row was Thomas Barnes himself, now serving as part of the training team. "Change doesn't come from punishment," Sarah began, her voice carrying clearly through the room. "It comes from understanding, from education, and from the willingness to acknowledge our mistakes." Behind her, a large screen displayed statistics from the past month's industry-wide assessment of security practices. In the audience, security officers leaned forward, many of them taking notes. These weren't just high-level executives. These were the people who made daily decisions at terminals across the country. The people who could either perpetuate bias or help eliminate it. "Let me introduce someone you all know from the viral video," Sarah continued, gesturing to Barnes. "But today, you're going to know him as something else, a catalyst for change." Barnes walked to the podium, his face showing both nervousness and determination. The room fell silent. This was the first time he would publicly address the industry since the incident. "A month ago, I was the face of everything wrong with our security protocols," he began. "Today, I want to be part of making it right." Together, Sarah and Barnes had developed a new training program called Check Your Gate. It was a clever play on words, referring both to airport gates and the gatekeeping that had become too common in private aviation. "Watch this," Sarah said, playing a video. It showed a series of scenarios, each featuring different travelers facing subtle and not-so-subtle discrimination. After each scene, the video paused, allowing security personnel to discuss proper protocols and identify their own potential biases. Jennifer Torres, now promoted to Director of Industry Relations at Tech Fusion, stood up to present the next segment. "We've installed these training modules at 50 major private terminals," she announced. "The early results are remarkable." The screen showed a 60% reduction in reported bias incidents at participating locations. But the most powerful moment came during the interactive session. Security officers shared their own stories, times they'd made assumptions, moments they regretted, and instances where they'd seen colleagues display prejudice but hadn't known how to address it. "This isn't about shame," Sarah emphasized, watching the honest exchanges. "It's about growth. Every person in this room has held biases. The question is, what do we do about them?" The afternoon session introduced the new standardized security app developed by Tech Fusion. It guided officers through a checklist that focused purely on documentation and security protocols, removing subjective judgment from the process. "Look at this feature," Sarah demonstrated, showing how the app tracked each security check. If an officer begins showing patterns of increased scrutiny based on demographic factors, the system flags it for review. Not for punishment, but for additional training and support. During the break, Sarah watched as Barnes spoke with a group of security officers, his voice carrying genuine emotion. "I lost my job because I couldn't see past my own prejudices," he told them, "but Ms. Mitchell gave me a chance to be part of the solution instead of remaining part of the problem." The conference wasn't just about aviation security. Representatives from hotels, restaurants, and retail establishments sat in the back, taking notes. Sarah's initiative was spreading beyond its original scope, influencing how businesses across industries approached security and access. As the day wound down, Sarah received a message from Elite Aviation CEO. Their new training program had been certified by the Aviation Security Administration as a model for the industry. What had started as a response to discrimination had become a blueprint for change. The real test, Sarah told the closing session, isn't what happens in this room. It's what happens tomorrow morning when you return to your posts. Will you see people, or will you see your assumptions about them? The audience stood in applause, but Sarah noticed something more important: the thoughtful expressions, the quiet nods of understanding. Real change didn't come from applause. It came from those silent moments of recognition and commitment to do better. As people filed out, Sarah overheard a young security officer telling his colleague, "I've got to rethink how I've been doing this job." And that, she thought, was exactly the point of the entire initiative. 6 months after the incident that sparked a viral video, Sarah Mitchell returned to the same private terminal where it all began. The morning sun streamed through the windows, just like that fateful day, but everything else had changed. A new security team staffed the checkpoint, wearing badges that displayed their Check Your Gate certification. The lead officer, a woman named Maria Rodriguez, had been trained under the new protocols that Sarah and her team had helped develop. As Sarah approached, she noticed the standardized security app open on the officer's tablet, the same one now used at private terminals across the country. "Good morning, Ms. Mitchell," Rodriguez greeted her professionally, following the new verification process step by step. No assumptions, no bias, just clear, standardized procedures. Other travelers moved through the checkpoint smoothly, each receiving the same level of respectful scrutiny regardless of their appearance. Sarah paused to look at the wall where a plaque now hung, displaying the terminal's perfect score on the latest industry equality audit. Beside it was a QR code that travelers could scan to report their security screening experience, part of the new transparency initiative. Quite a difference from 6 months ago, Michael Chen said, joining her at the checkpoint. He was carrying the latest industry report, which showed remarkable changes. Discrimination complaints had dropped by 85% across participating terminals. More importantly, customer satisfaction scores had risen significantly. As they walked toward their gate, they passed Thomas Barnes, who was conducting a training session for new security officers. After completing the education program, he had been hired by the Aviation Authority as a lead trainer, using his own experience to teach others about the dangers of unchecked bias. The hardest barriers to break, Barnes was telling his class, are the ones we don't even realize we built. But once you see them, you can't unsee them. He nodded respectfully to Sarah as she passed, both of them acknowledging how far things had come. In the waiting area, Sarah noticed a diverse group of executives comfortable in their space, no longer feeling the need to prove they belonged. A young black woman in a business suit caught her eye and smiled in recognition, one of many who had been inspired by the viral video to stop hiding in commercial flights and claim their rightful place in private aviation. Sarah's phone buzzed with a message from Elite Aviation CEO. The company's new chief diversity officer wanted to share some statistics. Private aviation bookings by minority executives had doubled in the past 6 months. What had started as a crisis had transformed into an opportunity for growth. Ms. Mitchell called out Captain Reynolds, approaching with a warm smile. Your flight is ready. He handed her a magazine. She was on the cover, along with other industry leaders who had transformed private aviation's culture. The headline read, The Sky's the Limit. How One Moment Sparked an Aviation Revolution. As Sarah settled into her flight, she opened her laptop to review the latest expansion plans. The Check Your Gate program was being adapted for other industries, luxury hotels, high-end restaurants, exclusive clubs. Businesses had realized that addressing bias wasn't just about avoiding bad publicity. It was about creating better, more profitable services for all clients. Jennifer Torres joined her on the flight, carrying updates from the National Training Center. We've certified over 5,000 security officers now, she reported. And guess what? Employee satisfaction is up too. Turns out, people prefer clear protocols over having to make subjective judgments. Looking out the window as they took off, Sarah could see the broader impact of the changes they'd initiated. The private terminal below was just one of hundreds that had transformed their approach to security and access. But more importantly, they had transformed their culture. Her phone lit up with one final message before they reached cruising altitude. It was from a young entrepreneur. 6 months ago, I watched your video and felt every moment of it. Today, I walked through a private terminal for the first time, headed to my first major investor meeting. Thank you for breaking down that door. Sarah smiled, thinking about how a moment of discrimination had led to a movement for change. The viral video had captured attention, but it was the steady, systematic work that followed that had created lasting impact. As her plane climbed through the clouds, she knew that sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest moments, and the courage to turn them into opportunities for transformation.